Springboro Tree Farms apiary today in, end of April? What is it today, Joe?
Yeah, April 25th or so.
April 20, whatever it is, and time to feed the bees. So you got Jim behind the camera and Joe doing the hard work today. And we thought we'd take a moment and just kind of talk through what feeding the bees is all about, why we do it and how we do it. And with that, I'm going to just kind of pose a couple of questions at Joe to say, why are you feeding the bees? I mean, they're out here on their own, and can't they make it? And why are we even doing this?
Well, good apiary management, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and part of that is proper feeding and nutrition to make sure that the colonies have food stores and energy stores to survive and to populate their hives. At this time of the year, end of the winter, first of spring, there's very little nectar available for them to make honey from and bring into the house, the beehive for energy. And so that means that we supplement at this time of year with a product that's called high fructose corn syrup. And it helps to stimulate brood production. If the queen knows there's food coming in, if there's food available in this case, it helps to build the colony up. She wants to start laying eggs, and it makes for a healthy population.
So how long do you have to feed them? I mean, what has to happen temperature-wise and flower-wise for us to kind of back off from this?
As the flowers start coming on and there's more nectar, we'll see more bees at the flowers, and we'll be able to not feed them anymore, and they'll bring in their own nectar. And at the same time, we want to diminish the high fructose corn syrup that they've put in there so that it is not in the honey that will eventually extract at the end of the season.
Cool.
So going into the fall, when we take honey off, we still leave ample quantities of honey in the beehive for their winter survival. We might leave 60, 70, 80 pounds of honey excess just for food for them to survive, and a lot of that's gone now. They've eaten that up over the winter, and they're ready to be fed. So high fructose corn syrup and regular table syrup, they really contain both fructose and glucose. And sugar, table sugar, is what's called a disaccharide. Di meaning two, saccharide meaning sugar. And that's made up of glucose and fructose, and they're linked together. If you just think of those molecules as linked together. And high fructose corn syrup contains both glucose and fructose in about a 55 to 45 ratio of fructose to glucose. And so this high fructose corn syrup that we're going to be feeding today is processed from corn syrup. They take corn and they make it into starch, and that's turned into syrup. That's 100% glucose. The problem with glucose is it's not all that sweet. And so to increase the sweetness of the corn syrup, there's enzymatic reactions that are commercially applied to the corn syrup, and it's used to convert a portion of the glucose into fructose, and that results in a mixture of glucose and fructose molecules that's known as high fructose corn syrup. Major distinction between high fructose corn syrup and simple sugar is not so much in their composition, but in their bonding, if you will. Glucose and fructose are linked together in a molecule that's called sucrose. And in this case, the high fructose corn syrup is made up of a mixture of free glucose and free fructose. And that helps the bees because they have a very simple digestive system. So instead of breaking that molecule down internally, they have a very simple sugar. Simple sugars in this case would be the fructose or the remaining glucose, but it's much easier for them to break down and use for their food source. So today we're going to be feeding high fructose corn syrup.
All right. So let's see where we keep that stuff, Joe. Where do we get this stuff?
We buy this from a commercial beekeeper. The Springboro Tree Farms buys it from a commercial beekeeper, and we buy it. He buys it in large lots. This particular container holds 110 gallons or so, and we've already fed them once this season, a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to feed them again today. So it's very simple. It's not very complex. This is what corn syrup looks like. As you can see, it's just Looks similar to Karo syrup. We're going to take it over here to the bees.
Now it's pretty chilly, and I know the bees don't really like this kind of weather. Are they going to be happy with you getting in there today, or how
that's a good point. We're going to find out. When it's cold, they don't like to move too well, but they also don't like to be disturbed. So I'm going to remove this, called a top cover, and inside you'll find our feeding box. And if you look real close, you'll see the bees are coming up to the screen, and they're trying to make their way to the high fructose corn syrup that you'll see on this side. So this way there's minimal drowning that can occur. That can be a problem with other feeders, but you'll see them here actually coming up, and they're looking for this high fructose corn syrup to take down and to use as a food source. So we're going to simply take what we drew off here, and in this case we're only going to put about a gallon. In this case a little bit less because it had some in it. This gallon here, depending on how robust the hive is, will feed the colony for anywhere from a few days up to a few weeks, and we'll be constantly checking them. So this is a very simple operation. In this case, we're done with this hive, and the bees are very happy to be coming up and getting their food source and putting it down in the hive and making reserves for them to eat.
So there it is, one down and 20 some to go. Show what else during the year. I mean, there are different ways to feed the bees. We do it. Springboro Tree Farms does it with these feeders up on top that you're about to see again. But what are some other ways that we have and can and folks can feed the bees with?
We've also fed the bees with just plain sugar that's placed on an inner cover. I don't have one here to show you, but it's just a wooden board that lays on top of the beehives, so they can come up, take the sugar, take it down, and make it into their food source. We also feed pollen patties as a protein source. So they need protein and they need an energy source, which is sugar. In this case today, high fructose corn syrup. We can also feed them sugar. And the most natural and what we really want them to get is nectar from the flowers, and that's going to be coming on very, very soon.
All right.
So take our next hive here.
That's actually still got a little bit in it.
You can see bees again are very highly congregated at the top of the screen. They're not drowning. They're just going down to where the high fructose corn syrup sits, and we're going to add a little bit on this side. There you go.
Pretty straightforward. It's a nice day to be out here working with the bees. It's chilly, as we said earlier, so the bees aren't going to be out and about very much, so we smoke them just a little bit when we have to, when we see them getting active, just to kind of keep them calmed down a little bit. And it actually goes pretty quick. Joe's been doing this up here.
These were fed a few days ago on just this side only. You can see what's remaining. So we'll add the remaining amount of syrup on this side. When we started off for our first feeding, we used about a gallon. Each of these sides will take a gallon, but we only filled it halfway. So this is about a gallon's worth of fructose corn syrup that we're going to give them right now. And if we get in and out, they don't bother us too much. If we go too slow and move the boxes around a little bit, they get a little anxious.
Yeah, they're...
Bees in there.
Yep. Okay, Joe and I have just walked up on the scene of the crime here. We've got some hives set out for expansion on the edge, kind of the property here. That's the apiary way over there, and a food plot kind of through the middle here, and then some hives along the edges here. And we'll do some splits here in another week or so, and these will be their new homes. In the meantime, what's going on here, Joe?
Well, we've had an intruder. We've had rocks on top of the top cover, but as you can see, this rock was not heavy enough to keep out this intruder. My guess would be a raccoon.
Although we got lucky on this one, because sometimes when raccoons get into these, they just really tear them up. And this guy wasn't that ambitious, I guess, so he just kind of moved it around for us.
I'd suggest that the reason that it's not so tore up is because this is plastic foundation here instead of wax foundation, so it's nice and rigid. So they were able to comb off the honey. In this case, there was pollen on this side, and there were honey on some of the other frames that you see scattered about.
Yeah.
But the frame probably survived because it's plastic and not a wax foundation.
Yeah. Hey, since we're out here feeding the bees, Joe, tell us about that guy right there.
Well, we talked about the top feeder that was essentially a tray that encompasses the whole box on the top. This is another type of feeder. It's a frame feeder, and as you can see, we pour our high fructose corn syrup into this hole, and if you look close, there's a series of holes here that would be like a ladder structure, if you will, for the bees, and the bees would come around the top and walk down and get their fill of nectar and crawl back out. They work just fine. They take up one of the frames. One of the issues with it, though, is there is probably a little higher degree of bee drowning. If they were to fall into the nectar, they can't climb out. But we've used these successfully in the past. It's just another way to feed the bees the high fructose corn syrup.
Yep. Feed the bees and occasionally feed the raccoons. But we got lucky since there was really not any serious damage done here, just a few things to pick up.